Welcome back. Well, as the world continues to change around you, you'll be watching the developments in Ukraine. We were talking about that a moment ago. And then in the US, for example, social media companies going through a very disruptive phase. Elon Musk taking over Twitter, and then Twitter and Meta, let's call it Facebook, firing workers this week. A lot sort of moving around the world. Graeme Codrington is the futurist at Tomorrow Today Global. Graeme, good afternoon. Good to talk to you again. Let's start with what's happening with social media at Twitter and Facebook. So many people are now being fired. Both seem to be going through a very sort of disruptive phase. Where are they going to go?
Stephen, I think we're in the middle of a systems change. I don't want to oversimplify lots of different issues and complex ideas, but I think what we're seeing is probably the end of an era. We're seeing it in politics, as you said. There's the US elections. We've recently had the UK not really having elections, but going through lots of political change. You've had Brazil, China, again, not elections, but doing something they've never done before. And as you say, in different industries, we're now seeing this system shift. I don't think it's really the end of the technology era, but I think that this unlimited growth mindset that has been in play for a decade or two in the tech sector has now very quickly come to a grinding halt, and a lot of companies owned by those billionaire single owners are looking around and I think preparing in advance for quite a big shift politically and now economically as well.
There's so many different things happening at the same time. We watch global politics. We watch the ANC at the moment. That conference just 5 weeks ago to go, I think, from Friday. We should get a sense next week of the relative balance of power. In a way, our politics plays into all of this, if you look at how so much of our politics happens on social media.
Well, exactly, and I think that is a part of the shift. I think globally, you've got people feeling that the systems that we've had for many, many years are not working. They're not adequate anymore for the times. And part of that, as you say, is a communication shift that all of us, if we choose to, can be a lot closer to the action. We can get a lot more immediate connection to influencers and influences of our thinking. And influential people with power. We also then have technology that enables us, just as ordinary people, to have our own voice as well. And I think we're now beginning to feel the effects of that in the political environment. And, of course, companies feel that too. If companies now do something that goes against maybe societal values or against some moral or ethical issues, we see people really raising their voices and the heat turning up. It's going to be interesting. 5 weeks from now is not only the ANC electoral conference, but it's also probably a very divisive football World Cup in Qatar, where I think there's going to be a lot of online protest around holding it in that country. So I think we're seeing it in every part of our lives. Is it too much to say it's maybe angry people? It's certainly activated people around the world looking for change, and whether they're trying to make the change or just responding to it, I think change is in the air.
It's so interesting because there's also such division. There's division in our society. We see in the United States this week people were predicting a Republican wave in their midterms, but we don't really get that. We get a sort of outcome where no one can govern. And governance in so many democracies is becoming so hard. And in China, which is not a democracy, but COVID-19 and the zero-COVID policy making governance difficult too. The point I'm trying to get to is it seems to me for leaders to make decisions and actually implement whatever their agenda may be, whoever they are, is actually suddenly a lot more difficult than it was 20 years ago.
I think I read a lot of history textbooks as somebody who studies the future. Obviously, nobody can predict the future, but we can see what happened in the past and learn from it. And I think we tend to forget that probably throughout human history, there always have been these big ideological divides, whether it's between capitalism and communism, between the right and the left of politics, or I think more accurately today it's between collectivism, those people who feel we need to make decisions more as society and what's good for a majority of people, versus individualism or libertarianism, those people who feel we should just let everybody get on with it and be individual about it. I think those divides have always been there. I think that in the past, though, you were able to sort of settle into your camp. All of your friends, the people you went to school with, probably had fairly similar views to you. And you weren't really exposed to the fact that there were other people with quite differing points of view. Now we have that exposure, as you say, social media being part of that. And I think when we find ourselves exposed to other people with very different ways of trying to make the world a better place. Let's be generous and say we're all, most of us, trying to achieve a good outcome, but have very different ways of doing it. I think it just raises big question marks, and I think people, confused might be too big a word, but I think people can't really see one clear path. And that is playing itself out, as you say, in the political environment, in the economic environment. And in the past, that has led to some quite bad outcomes with civil wars, and I hope we won't see too much of that. But it's going to be interesting to see over the next few years how even down to individual families, brothers and sisters and parents and children, navigating some of these big differences of opinion that we now see in the world and mirrored even in our families.
I mean, we see, in a way, over the last 30 years, a huge increase in inequality. And what that sort of shows us is the current sort of Western capitalist model, which is re-entrenched inequality. Here you see it starkest in the world, but everywhere that uses capitalism. And you see that that model is losing legitimacy as a result. We know, of course, the history of communism and how that has not necessarily worked. Is there any space in this moment for any kind of new model to emerge? I have no idea what that would be.
Stephen, actually, I think that's exactly what is happening. I think you've put your finger on it. Capitalism and communism, I think, have both failed, or are in the process of losing legitimacy, might be a better way to say it. And interestingly, I think they've both lost legitimacy for the same reason, and that is that the rich people took too much out of the system, and that wealth gap has increased all around the world. And I agree with you. I think that a new system must emerge. And I see glimmers of hope from the younger generations who are growing up in this era of disillusionment. So they didn't start in a place that they were comfortable with and then are slowly losing faith in it. They've started with no faith. They've started looking at a system saying this system isn't working. And we can add to the conversation climate change and the way that we treat the planet. And it's interesting to see, and I think we see it in the American election in the last few days. You've got younger generations coming through, but the younger generations are diverse, and they value diversity. And I think that's a huge part of what's just happened in America, is that when the young people come out to vote, they are pushing the world in a different direction. I think it's going to be interesting to see the corporate part of the Democrat Party in America responding to that. Here in South Africa, I think for slightly different reasons, we need to watch the younger generation. Sadly, our politicians just keep getting older and older, and it's going to be interesting to see when younger voices emerge. I think they must break through soon. And I think we're going to find they're going to be sounding like they're coming from a new system, like they're outside of our current realities. I think that's a hopeful statement. We can't imagine what the new system would look like, just like a peasant 300 years ago couldn't imagine the world without kings and queens. So we've got to start looking for those new shoots, those new ways of being coming through. I actually think South Africa is a great place to be living and looking, where first and third world are combined in one place, and we've got the fertile soil for something new to emerge. It would make a vast improvement on some of what we are seeing at the moment.
Graeme Codrington, thank you very much indeed for today, from Today, Tomorrow Global, the Futurist. Really appreciate it. To other